Which of these stories will you be talking about tomorrow?
Dave!
Occupy Denver, mounted police, tear gas, rubber bullets. Occupy Portland, Mayor Adams makes up to 30 arrests, then claims he supports Occupy.
I look forward to the Occupy movement's next phase, next iteration, of really finding a way to act on its core mission, to bring to justice, to bring more equity.
Occupy Richmond, an overnight raid and the bulldozing of the protesters' belongings. Occupy Wall Street, police reportedly taking the indigent and homeless substance abusers to Zuccotti Park and taking away generators just before a freak October snowstorm.
The more there's tactics that are being used to try and take away the warmth, like taking away the generators, supposedly for our safety, the more people are going to react to that, and they're going to just provide more things. We're going to find ways to make it work.
And Occupy Oakland, Scott Olson told of the worldwide support and gives a thumbs up. Occupy Day 45, live to...
Like 9% expansion. I love Herman. Is he the best?
Worsts.
Mayor Ford, it's me, Mark Delahunty.
Oh, the publicity that got me. And the publicity this will get. The Halloween party at the upstate New York home mortgage foreclosure law firm. Those are supposed to be people they foreclosed on. All that and more now on Countdown.
Bring it.
Good evening from New York. This is Monday, October 31st, 372 days until the 2012 presidential election. Only one thing could make Occupy our last 3/4 of the hour and not our first: the confluence of ever increasingly bizarre denials by Herman Cain of what is now 2 sexual harassment claims confirmed by 2 different news organizations and an unceasingly bizarre speech by Rick Perry. The fifth story on the countdown tonight: one leading GOP candidate is claiming he's the victim of a witch hunt, while the other one is acting as if possessed. Herman Cain first, accused in a Politico exclusive of having sexually harassed 2 women while he ran the National Restaurant Association. NBC News saying it has confirmed 2 employees of that association complained about Cain and that there was at least 1 payment made, partying like it was 19999. According to the Politico website, Cain's accusers say they faced sexually suggestive behavior by Cain that made them uncomfortable and angry and uncomfortable, behavior that allegedly included conversations allegedly filled with innuendo or personal questions of a sexually suggestive nature, physical gestures that, while not overtly sexual, made the women uncomfortable, and gestures they regarded as improper in a professional relationship. According to Politico, both women eventually left the National Restaurant Association after agreeing to 5-figure settlements that barred them from talking about why they had left. The denials from the Cain campaign began October 24th, 4 days after Politico first contacted spokesman C.J. Gordon for comment. Gordon writing in part that these are old and tired allegations that never stood up to the facts. This was settled amicably among all parties many years ago, and dredging this up now is merely part of a smear campaign. Politico reporter Jonathan Martin then confronted Cain with the anonymous allegations on Sunday before an appearance on CBS's Face the Nation. Cain was neither pleased nor forthcoming.
I'm not going to comment about 2 people that you won't tell me who they are. Okay, that's like negotiating. I'm not going to comment on that. Have you ever been accused of sexual harassment?
Turning the question back on the questioner, an old technique, but the questions did not go away with that. Cain faced them again this morning, and this time he actually denied the charge.
It is totally baseless and totally false. Never have I committed any sort of sexual harassment. If the Restaurant Association did a settlement, I wasn't even aware of it, and I hope it wasn't for much, because nothing happened. So if there was a settlement, it was handled by some of the other officers that worked for me at the association.
Cain also tried explaining why he had ducked the Politico reporter's question.
When we were asked for me to comment, they wanted for it to be from 2 anonymous sources. We weren't going to go and chase anonymous sources.
Except that turns out not to be entirely the truth of things. As Kane's chief of staff, Mark the Cigarette Man Block, conceded today, Politico's sources had not been entirely anonymous.
They did pass the name along, correct?
Which did not stop Mr. Kane from insisting on his innocence again and his victimhood, this time at the National Press Club.
When the charges were brought, as the leader of the organization, I recused myself and allowed my general counsel and my human resource officer to deal with the situation. And it was concluded after a thorough investigation that it had no basis.
Kane will reportedly give a more detailed defense tonight on Fox News, according to Byron York of the Washington Examiner, a noted right-wing mouthpiece. Kane insists he can only recall one woman charging him with harassment. Kane reportedly saying he never traveled with his accuser on the road, that the only incident he recalls is one where he held his hand up to his own chin and told the woman, quote, "My wife comes up to my chin," referring to her height, apparently. He said also the settlement paid his accuser was for 2 or 3 months' salary, the same as if the employee had been terminated. The Kane campaign is also facing other charges tonight. The Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel reporting the Kane campaign received over $37,000 in iPads, chartered jets, and other support from Prosperity USA, a tax-exempt charity founded by 2 Kane aides, one of them Mark Block. According to the Washington Post, many of the payments would be prohibited under federal election law, and Kane says he knows nothing about that report either. For more on the sagas of Herman Cain, I'm joined by Evan McMorris-Santoro, a reporter with Talking Points Memo who's been following the Cain story. Evan, good evening.
Hi, Keith.
The I know nothing about this initial response. He said these were anonymous names or accusations without names, and it turned out they weren't. At least one name was known to his chief of staff, Mr. Smokey Guy. And then he said he knew nothing of the settlement. Now, I mean, this has been changing all day. Do we have a sense of just how much the changes in his answers to these questions have propelled the story and have hurt him?
Well, you know, as you say, it's sort of gotten curiouser and curiouser as the day has gone on. He started out the day by, in Politico, denying everything, not commenting on anything. And then he comes out and says, you know, I don't know about any settlements. And then by the end of the day, he's saying, well, I knew about a settlement, but it wasn't very much money, and I'm not sure that it's really all that important. So it seems to be every time he opens his mouth, and he does seem to be interested in talking about this, he seems to go on TV and answer questions about it. He sort of adds more fuel to the fire and sort of digs himself maybe a bit of a deeper hole.
And he apparently started digging quite some time ago. He did this long interview earlier in which he said he expected to be the victim of a Clarence Thomas-like smear. Was that proactive spin about this story, or is he just some sort of prophet and or good guesser?
Well, this is, of course, a part of Herman Cain's appeal right from the very beginning. He's spoken quite often about how people, you know, whenever he talks about race at all, his own race, it's often in the guise of saying that liberals are out to get him because he's an African-American and an African-American conservative. So it makes sense he would identify with Clarence Thomas from the beginning. You know, whether or not he's being prescient, it seems like he's found himself in the same position now. But I do think it's sort of part of his larger persona of sort of embracing this idea that liberals are out to get him because he's a black conservative. And that's some of this pushback that we've seen on this story today from the Herman Cain campaign and other sort of conservative sources today.
And speaking of some conservative sources, the louder ones, Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, Nora Ingram all backed Cain. Limbaugh said it nothing more than, quote, the politics of minority conservative personal destruction. Ingram, who I should note was Clarence Thomas's law clerk and believes everything the man ever said that this quote is about, it's about destroying a good man's reputation. Hannity compared the case to Clarence Thomas and Anita Hill. I know this may sound a little paranoid, but could this be a setup? I mean, we've seen Mr. Cain play every card that he could to evoke sympathy for himself throughout this campaign. He's always the victim. Could it be martyrdom? Because certainly it can help get Clarence Thomas confirmed, as it turned out 20-odd years ago.
Well, if it's a setup, I'm not sure it's a very good one. I mean, he's finding himself answering a lot of uncomfortable questions. They're continuing to be uncomfortable. There's more news to be asked about this. I mean, everything he said today has made this into a day 2, day 3, day 4 kind of story, which I don't think you want at all if you're a presidential nominee, especially if you're running at the top of the field.
What if you know the theory, of course, that this is just a pretend candidacy? What if you're not actually running for president? You just want the publicity, and you need a way to get out before people realize you don't have campaign organizations in several of the key states. I hate to sort of portray this as a kind of death by reporter kind of thing, but is it? I mean, everything else about this campaign has been so utterly bizarre. Why are we taking that off the table?
Well, I think it's really too early to tell about any of that sort of stuff. I mean, there's still so much more of the story to come out. And as you mentioned earlier in the show, he's already sort of confirmed parts of it are true. So until we know all the details, I think it's sort of hard to say where this story goes. I mean, it's definitely true that conservative media is already kind of backing Kane up and coming to his defense, but that could change as more details come out. So, it's an interesting theory. We'll have to see how it plays out.
Not one of my more mainstream ones, but what the hell. Evan McMorris-Santoro of Talking Points Memo, great. Thanks for bearing with us tonight.
Thanks.
As I mentioned at the top of the program, Herman Cain is just one of the 2 GOP candidates with a new set of problems tonight. Texas Governor Rick Perry is the other, dropping in the polls, currently tied with Gingrich at just 7 points in Iowa. The one-time frontrunner hamstrung by a series of miserable debate performances. And now this, tape of a Perry appearance at a conservative forum in New Hampshire on Friday. Time magazine suggesting his appearance has revived rumors the governor, quote, may be still on serious painkillers after major back surgery in July. Rumors the Perry campaign is denied. Though whatever got into the governor Friday, he should probably consider getting it removed. Here are a few excerpts from the Rick Perry Show.
Write your checks. Gold is good. If you've got any in the backyard, because, if they print any more money over there in Washington, the gold's going to be good. And this is such a cool state. I mean, come on, live free or die. I mean, you got to love that, right? And my plan is really pretty simple. It does deductions for the mortgage, deduction for charitable. Yep, you keep that in there. And your state and local taxes are in there. You put those on, $12,500 for every dependent that you have, and just pretty easy math. Subtract it, send it in. It's awesome. Why not?
Yeah, tip your waitresses. Matt Taibbi is a Rolling Stone contributor and, of course, a contributing editor and a Countdown contributor. His latest story in Rolling Stone is Rick Perry, the best little whore in Texas. Matt, you obviously were behind Rick Perry's speech to sell the magazine, right?
Uh-huh.
Why, this had everything except him going, hey, I don't get no respect. Hey, I'm telling you. What? Huh?
I don't know, man. To me, I think we're witnessing like a historic campaign trail crack-up. I mean, the previous meltdowns on the campaign trail have all been episodes,
right.
like Ed Muskie crying or Dean's scream. This thing went on for 22 minutes, and it was like he was on laughing gas the whole time. It was really, and we've kind of seen it coming too. I mean, the people who have been following him have seen him kind of veer from pole to pole, and this has sort of been in the works. So my impression is it's just the guy is just rattled and he's losing it.
So, but it appeared that if there was going to be a meltdown, it would conclude previous to this with him just suddenly going, and another in the middle of a debate or a speech or an inauguration. Well, this is the reverse of things. Has that been seen on the stump anywhere before, that sort of super animated guy?
I haven't really seen that too much. I mean, I've seen Perry kind of all over the map because he's completely in command. If you look at his performance, for instance, at the Response, that religious revival back in the summer, he acted like a evangelical preacher. He was very commanding in his public speaking voice. Mm-hmm. I've seen him other times be almost like you say, narcoleptic on stage. I was at a speech in Georgia where the reporter next to me was like, should we call an ambulance? Yes. I mean, this guy's going to pass out. But this hyperactive thing is sort of a new Rick Perry, and you just never know what you're going to get.
Something from your piece, you quoted the Republican Party committee woman Liliana Ross, used to be Liliana Ross Leighton, saying at another campaign event, he grabbed my hand and held onto it. His hand was so cold, like ice, and he was sweating. He didn't seem well, like he was in pain or he was sick or something. I don't know what it was, but something was definitely wrong. Is she on to something, and do you have any idea what it might be?
No, I mean, I think he is onto something.
Yeah.
Obviously, a lot of the reporters who've been following Perry kind of noticed that somewhere in the beginning of September, he just sort of lost it. He barreled into the campaign with all this momentum, and he was very confident. When he felt like he was on his own home turf, he comes across as a very commanding, slick, smooth politician. But as soon as he got into the rigors of the campaign, I think, some people can just handle having their lives torn apart on national television, and other people just can't. And I think he's just one of those guys.
The Rick Perry that you're portraying in Rolling Stone is kind of the antithesis of what the Tea Party claims it wants.
Right.
Instead of this small government tax cutter, the ultimate soulless politician willing to sell himself at all times the highest bidder, as you say, willing to do absolutely anything for a buck today. How did he manage to turn the image around, so to speak?
Well, I think this is Rick Perry's sort of unique talent as a politician. He does have this ability to kind of identify where the wind is going to blow a few years from now. He kind of got to start following the American agricultural movement way back in the late 70s. He kind of knew that was going somewhere. It was sort of similar to the Tea Party kind of populist movement. He switched parties from Democrat to Republican when he saw which way Texas was moving, and he saw the Tea Party coming earlier than most politicians. And he wrote this book, Fed Up, which was full of a lot of the same rhetoric that we've seen from Tea Party leaders, even though it directly contradicted a lot of his record, because he's really a massive government stimulus kind of a politician. But he's very good at talking the talk. And he does have a little bit of a sense about where the wind is blowing.
Well, and that was the thing that stuck to him was his attempt to tap dance on secession. Because he never said it. He never came out and said, I'm in favor of it. He just said, well, it might be necessary if things continue. We should think about it. And he had 8 plausible deniability. That's him, isn't it? Plausible deniability.
Yeah, let's keep it on the table sort of thing. But, he definitely does, keep feet in both camps on almost every issue. But, the reality is when you actually look at what this guy is, he's really just about taking campaign money and giving out favors to those people. And that's really who he is.
And by the way, the title of his autobiography is It's Effed Up. It's not fair. Rolling Stone contributor and Countdown contributor Matt Taibbi, it's always a pleasure. Thank you, Matt.
Thanks, Keith.
The rest of the news hour we devote to Occupy and the credibility that only repressive, nearly totalitarian tactics can endow, on display in Denver, in Richmond, and Austin. In Portland, mixed with an extraordinary decision, police posting photos of those that they arrested online. But there's breaking news from Nashville, where Occupy has just won a round in, or at least near, court. That's next. This is Countdown.
Welcome to Better. Visit tdameritrade.com/trade.
Denver, in a city once so liberal it was accused of being a staging ground for a UN plot to subvert the government via bicycles. Mounted policemen, tear gas, and rubber bullets used on Occupy protesters. Occupy Richmond raided overnight. Bulldozers used to destroy personal possessions of the occupiers there. Occupy Austin, in the heart of liberal territory. At least 36 arrests because of an unauthorized food table. The 1% strikes back. Live to Denver, to New York, and with Eliot Spitzer. But Nashville wins a late legal triumph. And the company Halloween party, where the company's job is to steal people's homes from them. Employees dressing up as their own victims, perhaps forced to dress up. Details ahead in Worst Persons. I'll head on Countdown.
1-800-444-MISO. Remember, 1-800-444-MISO.
Hundreds of protesters arrested this weekend. The national count up to as much as 2,963 by one count. Police using pepper spray, mace, even bulldozers to clear protesters and their belongings out of city parks. In our fourth story tonight, protesters from Denver to Rochester standing their ground in a federal court today siding with the protesters in Nashville, ordering police there to stop making arrests. We start in Denver, where hundreds of police, reportedly armed with clubs, tear gas, pepper spray, and rubber bullets, moved into the Occupy site on Saturday after they say the crowd became unruly. Protesters bearing physical evidence of the confrontation, many displaying wounds from rubber bullets and pepper spray canisters. In all, 20 protesters were arrested.
It was very peaceful until somebody showed up with a bunch of weapons. Now who is that? Oh, it was you guys.
Meanwhile, in Portland, Oregon, protesters facing off against police dressed in riot gear. The officers declared the Pearl District Park closed at midnight, then arrested 25 protesters who refused to leave. The Portland Police Department then took the unprecedented, though apparently not illegal, step of posting mugshots and names of arrested protesters on Facebook. No indication whether they had any motivation for doing so beyond shaming the protesters. Portland Mayor Sam Adams saying that while he's been supportive of the protests so far, he's not happy with the direction they've taken, then criticizing the movement for, he says, straying from its core mission.
I look forward to the Occupy movement's next phase, next iteration, of really finding a way to act on its core mission.
Certainly that will be aided by posting their photos online. To Nashville, where there were also mass arrests over the weekend. We reported Friday protesters were standing their ground in defiance of a police order to vacate the park. Over the weekend, troopers arrested about 50 protesters. Today, the American Civil Liberties Union of Tennessee filed a lawsuit on behalf of Occupy Nashville protesters who were arrested on Friday, seeking a temporary restraining order against Governor Bill Haslam, writing, "The government chose a metaphorical shotgun to kill a fly." This afternoon, good news for the protesters. Tennessee officials agreed to stop enforcing curfew and arresting protesters. In other cities, though, the arrests continue. Rochester, New York, 32 arrested Friday night after the group refused to leave a downtown park there. In Austin, Texas, 37 protesters arrested last night. More than a dozen met with city and police officials today to discuss the incident. Meanwhile, about a dozen protesters arrested in a public park in Richmond, Virginia, where Occupy members had been camping since October 15th. After police evacuated the area, the remaining belongings, which included not just tents, but also a makeshift library and a volleyball court, were scooped up by bulldozers and deposited in dump trucks. And in Kansas, the hotbed of liberalism, 100 protesters marched on Koch industry headquarters in Wichita on Saturday, the company owned by oil billionaires Charles and David Koch, who are some of the far right's biggest funders.
Lots of money has been put into our political system to buy votes, and so I think you go where the money is, which is here, right here.
And lastly, to Oakland, where you will remember that last week 24-year-old Iraq War veteran Marine Scott Olson suffered a fractured skull after police fired tear gas canisters into the crowd. He was told over the weekend of the international support for him. Still not speaking, he gave a thumbs up sign. Hundreds of protesters marching through the streets of Oakland Saturday night to protest police brutality as officers in riot gear lined the streets and helicopters again hovered overhead. Let's talk about Denver. I'm joined from there by Jeannie Hartley, who witnessed those unruly, that word is in quotes, protesters on Saturday. Thanks for your time tonight.
Thank you so much, Keith, for having me here.
Tell me about...
Much appreciated.
You're very welcome. Tell me about the scene on Saturday. The protesters were described as unruly. Are the police being truthful in that statement?
I have to tell you, to be honest, I have to tell you what I saw.
Okay.
What I witnessed was not anyone being unruly. What I saw was several police officers chasing en masse into the park, running towards a man in a tree, one little guy in a tree, and then chasing after another man and throwing him down onto the ground and putting him in a chokehold with officers surrounding him. I saw tear gas being dispersed. I saw rubber pellets, these pepper spray pellets, being shot into the crowd towards people that, from my vision, were not being unruly. To be fair, I couldn't see everything that was going on everywhere. But from where I was standing, the people were not being unruly at all. We'd had a perfectly peaceful march, a perfectly peaceful rally, and it turned into something much worse.
Lieutenant Matt Murray was quoted in the Denver Post as saying, "We're reacting to what they do as long as they are legally protesting. We'll protect their right to do that." The officers today did a great job of showing restraint. And yet something was tweeted today, which I think seems apropos in this. When figuring out who's looking for a riot, check to see who came dressed for one. Did you have a sense of the police instigation merely by preparation? I think I may have just made that up on the spot, but I think you know what I'm saying here. That go ahead.
I think that was very well put, just the way you said it, Keith. First of all, it was extraordinary the amount of police force that were present before anything was, by their definition, I'm guessing, unruly. Mm-hmm. I mean, the governor complained a week or so before that we cost the $365,000 to the city of Denver. It was his decision to release that mass of force to be available in the park. It's my understanding that he's claiming now that the cost was $500,000. They had hundreds of police force, Keith, surrounding a food table. Hundreds of them in riot gear. This was an unnecessary expense to Denver by far.
As I just mentioned, protesters in Nashville were successful in the courts. Is there any thought of going to the courts in Denver or to the state courts in some way?
Yes, that is actually something that is in the works. We have a legal team, an amazing legal team, I must say. We're also working with the National Lawyers Guild. And there are things in the works. I can't address that specifically because I'm not an attorney, but I can promise you that efforts are being made towards that end, to be sure.
Give me a philosophical answer to this one, if you can, Ms. Hartley. The mess we saw in Oakland, the smaller messes we've seen in New York and elsewhere, how is it that rather than taking the prudent method of suffering the protests as best they could, everybody involved in a government somewhere or a police department somewhere or at a state level somewhere seems to think that the best way to make this go away is to provide all the videotape that any news broadcaster could ever want to show ordinary citizens getting pummeled by police. Has that occurred to you yet, how ridiculous a response this is purely from a public relations standpoint?
Yes, it is. And I also think that on a grander scale of things, which makes that even more absurd, is that people have taken to the streets because of so many injustices that have been in place for far too long. You know, with the issues of the underwater mortgages and the corporate greed and the student loans, $100,000 student loans, and they graduate from college and there's no jobs in sight. And the cost of the wars, unending costs of precious lives. People are in the streets because of injustice. So for the police force to inflict more injustice upon us is not going to make us leave the streets. It's going to make more people come into the streets.
Well said. Jeannie Hartley from Occupy Denver, great thanks for some of your time tonight.
Thank you so much, Keith.
Then there is New York, where Occupy is buffeted by the seizure of its generators, by the weather, and by reports that the New York police are directing, perhaps even bringing, substance abusers among New York's homeless to Zuccotti Park. Next. On Friday, Ace New York One political anchor Errol Lewis told us that the irony of the sudden seizure by the city of Occupy Wall Street's power generators was that they had not been used for heating. They had been primarily used to fuel the state-of-the-art remote communications setup in Zuccotti Park. In our third story on the countdown, when the pollution-altered climate suddenly produced a record snowfall on Saturday, the irony became irrelevant to the preview of Occupy's newest enemy, winter. And the cold may have become secondary to a report of the NYPD actually giving something to Occupy for a change. Across the Northeast, from New York City to New Haven to Boston, protesters braved the sleet and snow on Saturday, making it clear they are here to stay.
It's so worth it. The cold, wet, it's nothing compared to the change we're trying to make.
On Friday, we told you that NYPD and NYFD officers had swept in to confiscate Occupy's generators. Over the weekend, lawyers representing OWS sent a letter to the city's fire commissioner demanding the return of the illegally seized property, saying, contrary to the mayor's public justifications, the seizures were not motivated by health or safety concerns. The city's removal of the generators is nothing more than a pretext for violating the First Amendment rights of the Liberty Park, that's the name by which Zuccotti was formerly known, occupiers by literally freezing them out. The FDNY's response, a spokesman asking for time to review the facts and request. While they were reviewing, at least 40 protesters were treated for hypothermia, 2 hospitalized. Last night, fire officials agreed to give the generators back, but not for use in the park. Joining me now, a man who has chronicled much of what's happened at Zuccotti Park from the planning stages on, even through the storm over the weekend, Democracy Now! Reporter Ryan Devereaux. Thanks for coming in, Ryan.
Thanks for having me, Keith.
Clarify that what they were using the generators for. Were they to be used for heat, or what was the status of those things?
The generators were used for heat. They were used for heat in the medical tent, for example, where they were trying to treat people with hypothermia. They were also used for the media center, where Occupy Wall Street folks have been broadcasting sort of their message and chronicling their experience down there at the plaza. They were used to help prepare food in the food tent. They were used for all sorts of different things. But I think it's particularly important and relevant given the number that you just listed there of people that experience hypothermia, that these generators, which were used to prevent those sort of circumstances, were confiscated. And
there was no lead time between the promulgation of rules relative to where the generators could be, relative to tents and canvas and all the rest of that. There was no, in other words, they said you have to keep this much space there, and then no time to make that happen. There was no intervening time to adjust as anybody would get with a building violation, for instance.
Right. That's exactly the point that the attorneys made in the letter that they sent to the commissioner of the New York City Fire Department over the weekend. That this is not the way that the department normally goes about these sort of situations. They normally tell you in advance that there's a violation and then give you time to correct the situation. There was no advance notice here in this case, in this particular confiscation.
A Saturday snowstorm, the last Saturday in October, is obviously an unusual thing and brings up a whole different sort of climate change conversation we could also have. But it's just a preview of what's obviously ahead if this is just an average New York winter. And that was a question I was asking when I went down early in the month. Are there additional plans about the weather, or is it essentially toughing it out in Zuccotti Park with or without electric or other kind of heat?
Well, I mean, it really depends on who you speak to. I was down there on Saturday. And one thing I do want to say is that a lot of people have said these protesters are not going to, once this is no longer fun, they won't do it anymore. And while they do have fun down there, I can tell you that Saturday was not fun.
I would guess.
It was about as miserable as it could be. It was freezing cold. Everything that people owned was soaking wet. People's tents collapsed. And there are people here from out of state who are there committed to being there. So, yeah, in terms of how they are going to deal with the winter, I know that there have been some people talking about maybe doing an indoor occupation, but I think that the consensus is that they are going to try to stick it out in Liberty Square. And there are a bunch of committed people, a bunch of committed folks there that I think are willing to make that happen.
Plus, you can do it in shifts. You don't have to stay there outdoors 7 days a week for the entirety of the winter. All right, let's talk about the report that the police across the city are telling people. The other version, bringing people with mental health, addiction problems, take it to Zuccotti. What do you know about that story?
Well, it's a story that's been floating around the park for weeks now. This is something that people have been talking about. A lot of the folks that are involved in the security operations there at the park have been saying that when they encounter, sort of transient homeless type of people there in the park, that they're hearing reports that the police have been encouraging them to head down to Zuccotti to, quote-unquote, take it to Zuccotti. It's very upsetting, particularly when you consider that some of these people that are arriving to the park have severe psychiatric problems or drug addiction problems. And if the NYPD is indeed suggesting that they go somewhere, why don't they suggest them to go somewhere that has the resources and the professionals with the capability to handle the particular problems that they have? Any answers occur to you to that rhetorical question? I mean, it looks very bad. If this is true,
would be the provocateurs, essentially involuntary provocateurs, or in another context, human shields, if you will. That's the same mentality to it, anyway.
That's definitely the sense among the protesters, that this is a concerted effort at sabotage. Whether or not we will find concrete evidence that that's the case, we'll have to wait and see. But.
Ryan Devereaux, reporter for Democracy Now!, who's been at Occupy Wall Street since before the beginning. Great, thanks again for coming in.
Thank you.
The premise that Occupy has already won by changing the dialogue, and now the effort by the hysterical right to change it right back again to the question, will there be riots? Former New York Governor Eliot Spitzer joins me.
Identity theft is the fastest growing crime in America today. With technology, it's getting easier all the time.
Breaking and unhappy news out of Oklahoma City, where an Occupy Oklahoma City protester has been found dead in his tent in downtown Oklahoma City this afternoon. That according to the police department there. According to the police, it appears the man died of natural causes. The Occupy group of Oklahoma City says he was a homeless man who had identified himself only as the poet, and those who had an additional idea of who he was are awaiting notification of his family before they say anything else. So apparently a cause, natural death of a protester, for the first one apparently, in Oklahoma City. Again, no untoward circumstances believed involved. Eliot Spitzer's assessment of the end game and all the games in between for the Occupy movement coming up. First, the sanity break. And on this date, 1963, American TV host and tastemaker Ed Sullivan was traveling through Britain's London airport, now Heathrow, when he spotted a crowd of 1,500 young boys and girls standing outside the place in the rain. He asked what the commotion was about and was told the Beatles were returning home from Sweden, to which Sullivan replied, "Who the hell are the Beatles?" And just over 3 months later, they were debuting in America on Sullivan's Sunday night variety show. Ladies and gentlemen, the Beatles. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen, time marches on. I never said I could do a Sullivan. We begin with the TMO adorable clip of the day, Puppy versus Ice. Having never seen anything of the sort before, 7-week-old Bandit is being cautious. Friend or foe? Liquid or solid? Maybe Bandit should call his pal Smokey for some help. He's on the Kane campaign. Either way, the battle seems to end in a draw. Tune in tomorrow when Bandit goes toe-to-toe with Steam. In Syria, a strong man is attempting to pull 2.5-ton train up a hill. You're not impressed? Well, with the incline, he claims the train weighs 100 tons. He's in position and Pull, pull. Please make sure you lift with your legs. Train's not moving that quickly. Must be local. He's successful in his attempt, held up by his fans. But you got the feeling he's going to feel that in the morning. Finally, it is Halloween, so let's check in with our WXYZ Action News reporter, Kimberly Craig, who's at the Erebus Haunted House in Pontiac, Michigan. As a reporter, even when doing a somewhat lighthearted story, it's important to maintain a sense of composure at all times.
You're paying attention over here. You know what? If you look at that. They did not pay me enough!
Yes, it was all in good fun. Well, we're here for your brains, your viewers' brains. Unfortunately, one of those monsters was not hired by the haunted house. Oh, happy Halloween. Time marches on. Eliot Spitzer on the future of Occupy and the far right's apocalyptic vision of riots in the streets. Or, if no riots in the streets, at least they'll have polls about riots in the streets coming up.
For $39.99 and receive free shipping when you call in the next 10 minutes with your credit card. Call now or order online at timelife.com/apocalypse.
Occupy, he says, has already won. What's next? In the ultimate smear card, its opponents are now playing the idea that it will end in riots. And it was just another Friday worst person story here. The mayor of Toronto calling 911 and swearing up a storm in dreadful fear of a fictional TV character in a Xena costume. Canada reacts to the worst persons list like nothing I've ever seen before. And the 911 story continues next in worse.
Call this number or go to SelectQuote.com. SelectQuote. We shop, you save.
The next stage for Occupy with Eliot Spitzer. First, before we get to worst persons, I think I have to thank a few people for the extraordinary response to Friday's edition of this segment. Those people would be Canada. Well, specifically the Toronto Globe and Mail, the Toronto Star, Torontoist, Toronto Life, the National Post, CTV, the Montreal Gazette, the Winnipeg Free Press, iPolitics.ca, Yahoo News Canada, and a lot of blogs. All this because I named Toronto's mayor, Rob Ford, Friday's worst person in the world after his series of panicky and reportedly F-bomb-laden calls to 911 when an actress portraying a satirical news reporter staked him out in the driveway of his own home. The positive attention this got was only slightly more than if I had discovered Canada. I don't know if this owes to Mayor Ford's unpopularity or the traditional courteousness of the Canadian people who are just sending a kind of collective thank you note via media. So you're very welcome, and thanks especially to all of you in Canada who like my slight Canadian accent. I went to school with a lot of hockey players, and they were real nice guys too. Or OC, as some of you say. OK Blue Jays. Thus, here are Countdown Top 3 nominees for tonight's Worst Persons in the World. The bronze to Mayor Rob Ford of Toronto. I know a good thing when I see it. Supporters of the mayor are apparently now claiming that the tape of his 3 calls to 911 over the ambush interview by Marg Delahunty would vindicate him that while Mayor McPanic did unleash the F-bombs, he didn't call anybody, quote, bitches, unquote, and he was calling largely because his daughter was scared and screaming, and you could hear that on the tape, which raises a simple question. As mayor of the city, presumably having some influence over Toronto's neatly uniformed police department, why doesn't he order the tape of the call released? The runner-up, another mayor, Chris Myers of Medford, New Jersey. Hello again, Mayor Myers. Show the photo. Thank you. This is not the first time we've seen this photo. A so-called rent boy in California says the mayor paid him $500, but reneged on promises of a car and a recording studio in exchange for sex a year ago this month. Mayor Myers has given a series of increasingly bizarre quasi-denials that the photo was him, wasn't him, or that the anonymous rent boy was or wasn't his rent boy. I can't comment on something I don't know. This person hasn't come forward. Unfortunately, this is a story on rumors and allegations. These claims are ridiculous. I believe I've been wronged by stories pinned on anonymous reports. I didn't do it. God is my witness. Sorry, I'm lapsed into Belushi. Myers says he will not resign. May not be his choice. Medford Township Council has scheduled a special meeting for Wednesday, ostensibly to talk about the mayor's pet project. No. This is a business development. The meeting is expected to devolve into a conversation about rent boys. But our winners, the law firm of Stephen J. Baum of Buffalo, New York. You may have already seen these photos. They were sent by an appalled employee of Stephen J. Baum of Buffalo, New York, to a columnist at the New York Times. They're from the company's 2010 Halloween party. Stephen J. Baum of Buffalo, New York is the state's largest foreclosure mill. It represents banks and mortgage servicers in their efforts to foreclose on homeowners and throw them out. It has been accused of trickery to try to evict people with steady incomes who were up to date on their mortgages. So naturally for Halloween, Stephen J. Baum encouraged its employees, all of whom would presumably live in terror of becoming the next victims of their scumbag bosses, to dress up for Halloween as homeless people, carrying bottles of booze, wearing signs that mock the excuse of those who have been illegally evicted. I was never served. One of the pictures shows a coffin that depicts a lawyer who had filed a class action suit against the Stephen J. Baum Company. Another shows part of the Stephen J. Baum Company offices decorated to make them look like a row of foreclosed homes. So this is what they dress up for as Halloween? We're going to play that game, are we? Long game, Stephen J. Baum, 220 North Point Parkway, Suite G, Amherst, New York. Or if you're on Long Island, 900 Merchants Concourse, Suite 412, Westbury, New York. It's a long game, Stephen J. Baum, and there are many costumes to be worn. Being a foreclosure mill law firm is bad enough. Adding visual abuse of your victims on Halloween, poor choice. The law firm of Stephen J. Baum. Scumbags. Today's worst persons. Nora. Senator Ed Muskie noted during the 1970 midterms that there are only two kinds of politics, the politics of fear and the politics of trust. In our number one story, it should come as no surprise that Fox News works almost exclusively in the former, but what does come as a surprise is how Fox not only ignores the trust of America at large, but misused it to mold their fears. Fox News has come out again against the Occupy Wall Street protest, painting them as a far-left conspiracy run by the standard liberal strawman George Soros and the invisible foe Acorn. So the results of the latest Fox News poll should probably come as no surprise. When asked, how concerned are you that the Occupy Wall Street demonstrations will eventually turn into street riots, 47% of respondents expressed some level of concern. And obviously Roger Ailes said, that's not high enough. The question itself, of course, almost previews the next line of attack, but on the heels of 4 polls last week that show a majority of Americans are in favor of the protesters and certainly their right to protest, it does point to the larger dilemma. Right now, the Occupy movement has an extraordinary amount of energy and support, and how now to mobilize it into social change. Here to perhaps lay out a blueprint on that for moving forward, the former governor of New York, Eliot Spitzer. It's good to see you, sir.
Keith, thank you for having me on again.
This poll, the idea that you could just seriously ask people, when is it going to come to riots in the street? That sort of lay out what they have next in mind after the anti-Muslim, anti-black, anti-Jewish, what else was it? George Soros-funded revivification of or acorn sticks, things did not stick.
It's also just the phrasing of the question.
Yes.
Everybody who's ever used a poll, crafted one knows you phrase a question to get a predetermined answer. Are you worried at all that maybe eventually something bad will happen where people, and of course people are going to say, yeah, I'm a little worried about that. But as you rightly pointed out, the public supports Occupy Wall Street, the mission, the purpose, how they're articulating what they're doing. This is almost exclusively a peaceful, well thought out protest by people who care. That's why the public's with them.
And you have written now that it has, many people have made a point similar to this, but I think you made it more strongly than others have, and I want to know why in particular, that they have already, there is already a victory to declare.
Oh, absolutely.
Changing the dialogue. How do you sustain that when temperatures are not sustained?
Right.
In other words, if it's
going in inverse correlation with
it's
the
sustained, it's a symbol that makes
right.
it sustainable, but the symbol involves people staying there. Yes.
Well, look, first of all, the frustration at these so-called pundits and thoughtful people on major editorial pages saying all they're doing is showing up. Wait a minute. They, being the Occupy Wall Street folks, have done more to change what we're talking about than all the politicians in Washington who pretend to be progressives or liberal, all of them put together, maybe except Elizabeth Warren. They've done nothing that comes close to what this group of students and thoughtful young kids has done. So that's why my hat goes off to them, and I applaud them. Now, what next? It is hard. It's going to be cold. So here are a couple of simple things. One, every college kid in America goes home over Thanksgiving. Announce the day before Thanksgiving when kids are getting home, huge rallies. Show the support on college campuses, which from my sort of experiential information is huge. Get big name musicians. Think back to the 60s. I hate to say it, you and I can do that.
Yeah.
Pete Seeger. Get Bruce out there.
Someone's already down there.
That's
Tom
right.
Novello
That's
can
right.
go there.
Get them to say in every spot the day before Thanksgiving, huge rallies to make our sort of opening statement as we go into the next chapter. The other thing I would do is say, you know what, maybe we are going to take 2 weeks off. But during that time, get the Robert Reiches, the Joe Stiglitzes, the Paul Krugmans, the really thoughtful, smart folks come up with a couple ideas. Now, here's what I think is the clincher. Come January, every governor, every mayor gives a state of the state, a state of the city. Leverage off them. The entire media is at every state capitol, at every city hall. Have a rally with 10,000 folks. Go to Albany, where we have a governor, I hate to say it, in New York, who's opposing the millionaire's tax. Say, Governor 1%, we're showing up and we're going to steal your story. You can be inside the chamber giving a typical speech. We're going to be there talking about real people. Have 100,000 people in Washington the day of the State of the Union. Make those markers when we supposedly define the agenda. Mass, huge numbers with musicians, with smart people, Bruce, Krugman, whomever it may be. You know, and let me just add, they don't need advice from me. They have done an amazing job.
You will recall perhaps the name Henry Root, who was one of the assistant prosecutors when they eliminated the special prosecutor during Watergate. And the recollections of the night that they fired Archibald Cox was of his office being flooded by telegrams, most of which said, "Stay in your office."
Right.
And it didn't mean he could do anything staying in his office, but the presence, the symbol can't be overrated here, can it?
Absolutely not. You need a symbol like that. And that's why Zuccotti Park, Liberty Park, has become so powerful, especially, I mean, let's face it, what the NYPD and others are doing has, I think, been, we need to dig deeper and find out what's going on. Certainly, I hate to say it, but it's helped Occupy Wall Street. It has made every person say, wait a minute, these are basically good individuals who are peaceful, who are doing what they think is important for our country, and we agree with them. Why are they being arrested?
Right, and what having been governor, you would know what governor would ever allow rubber bullets to be used on unarmed protesters.
Or the governor of New York trying to kick them out of state parks. It just shouldn't be happening in New York.
Not good PR, and you wonder if perhaps they're secretly in support of Occupy. Former Governor of New York, Eliot Spitzer, thanks as ever.
Thank you.
Excellent points to make. That's countdown for this, the 294th day since the Republicans took control of the House, 294 days without them having passed one jobs bill of any kind. The season premiere of Vanguard, Arming the Mexican Cartels, is next. I'm Keith Olbermann. Thanks and congratulations on getting through another day of this crap. Good night and good luck.